Ever lost a deal worth millions because of one single word?
Happens more often than you think.
Oh, I bet it does.
Yeah. Studies show that almost half of international business deals, they fall apart, not over like the actual terms.
Right.
It's communication,
Yeah.
breakdowns. It's like there's this hidden language to negotiation, you know?
That's what we're going deep on today, right?
Yeah.
Diplomatic business English.
Exactly.
So you can turn a no into, hey, let's make this work. Navigate those cultural minefields.
Yeah.
Even those like contract changes without calling the lawyers every 5 seconds.
We'll give you practical phrases, strategies, stuff that actually works.
Real world stuff.
In boardrooms and, those virtual meetings we all love.
By the end of this, you'll be able to handle any business conversation.
That's right.
With confidence, finesse, whether it's salary negotiation or, a global merger.
It's a powerful skill set to have.
Yeah, for sure. So let's dive in. I'm really curious about this, like how high the stakes can get just from the language we use.
Okay, well,
business.
Picture this. Silicon Valley startup, right? They're about to land a huge contract. Everything's perfect. But then, boom, the negotiator uses one phrase that's a little too aggressive, maybe even a bit disrespectful, and the deal is gone. And this isn't just a story. This actually happened.
Wow. That's a tough lesson. So it really is about more than just being polite.
It's strategic.
Yeah.
It's about building those bridges, finding those win-win situations, ultimately getting to that yes.
Right.
And it's not just small startups. Even companies like Apple and Samsung. They've gotten into billion-dollar disputes over how to interpret a few words in their contracts.
Wow, the power of words. So how do we learn this language dance and avoid those pitfalls?
Well, one of the most effective techniques I've seen, I call it the pause and probe.
Pause and probe.
Yeah. So instead of just reacting immediately, which we all do, sometimes impulsively, you take a second, you pause, absorb the information, and then you ask questions.
Okay.
You probe deeper.
I see.
To really understand and maybe uncover hidden opportunities.
That pause, though, that must be so hard, especially when you're under pressure to respond quickly.
It does take practice.
Right.
But just think, that pause shows that you're thoughtful. You're really listening, not just waiting to talk. And it can really de-escalate tension.
Interesting.
It can prevent those knee-jerk reactions that can blow up a whole negotiation.
Makes sense. So strategic silence and asking the right questions?
Absolutely. Let's say someone gives you a proposal and it seems totally impossible. Instead of saying no right away, what if you ask, what would have to change for this to work? It changes the whole conversation.
It does.
You're not at a roadblock anymore.
Right.
Now you're brainstorming together.
I like that. And the whole mood shifts.
Yeah.
It's less confrontational.
Exactly. And that kind of collaborative spirit, it's crucial for building strong business relationships no matter what culture you're dealing with.
That brings up a good point, because a lot of the materials you sent over really emphasize understanding those cultural nuances, especially in international business.
Yeah.
And it seems like that adds a whole other level of complexity to this diplomatic language.
Oh, yeah. For sure. Cultural differences, they can be so subtle, but they make a huge difference.
Absolutely.
Think about it. A simple yes in one culture might mean I'm totally on board, but in another, it could just be a polite, I hear you.
Right.
No real commitment there.
I've heard some horror stories about deals falling apart because of those kinds of mix-ups.
Oh, definitely. It can be a minefield. I remember this U.S. company, they lost a massive deal in Japan.
Oh, no.
Because they took yes at face value.
Yeah.
They thought the Japanese side was all in, but really they just meant they understood the proposal, but they had some concerns.
Ouch. So how do we avoid those kinds of misunderstandings?
Well, you've got to be aware of the culture.
Right.
Take the time to learn about the communication style, the negotiation norms, the specific people you'll be working with. For example, German business culture, they're very direct. They value efficiency.
Active.
But in French business culture, it's all about building relationships first.
It's fascinating how the same words can have such different meanings.
Oh, yeah.
Depending on where you are in the world.
Absolutely.
It's like everyone's speaking the same language, but with different accents and subtitles.
That's a great way to put it. And these days, with global business and virtual meetings, mastering these nuances is more important than ever. Even something as simple as A pause,
Oh, yeah.
how long it lasts, can be interpreted differently across cultures.
That's true.
Yeah.
What might be, a normal pause here
Right.
could be seen as disrespectful somewhere else.
Right.
Are there any specific techniques you'd recommend for navigating these kinds of intercultural conversations, especially online?
Well, one technique that I found helpful is the cultural pause technique.
Okay.
It's basically just building in extra time in virtual meetings, for people to process information,
Yeah.
clarify if they need to,
Mm-hmm.
especially across cultures. It might feel a little awkward at first,
Yeah.
but trust me, those conversations go so much smoother
I know.
when everyone feels heard and understood.
It's like you're giving everyone a little breathing room
Yeah.
to adjust to the different paces.
Exactly. So are you ready to dive into some real-world scenarios?
Absolutely. Let's get practical. How about we start with a classic, that line nobody wants to hear, your price is too high.
Oh, the dreaded price objection.
Right.
Well, instead of getting all defensive
Right.
or immediately dropping your price,
Yeah.
can make you look less valuable,
Makes sense.
try using what I call the value bridge technique.
Value bridge. I like the sound of that.
It's all about shifting the focus from the cost to the value.
Okay.
So instead of getting stuck haggling over numbers,
Right. Yeah.
you highlight those unique benefits your product or service offers.
So you're basically reframing the whole conversation to show why that investment's worth it. Can you give us an example?
Sure. Let's say you hear that dreaded phrase, your price is too high.
Yeah.
Instead of caving in, you could say, I understand your concern about the budget, but maybe we could talk about how our solution can actually give you a great return on your investment and actually save you money in the long run.
That's smart. You're acknowledging their concern,
Yeah.
but you're subtly shifting the focus to the value you're bringing.
Exactly. It's about moving away from just a transaction
Right.
and into a more collaborative discussion about what everyone wants to achieve in the long term.
It's a partnership, not just a quick sale.
Exactly. Yeah, it really is about building a relationship.
It is, yeah.
More than just a transaction.
Now, what about contracts? Because those discussions, they can get,
Yeah.
kind of bogged down with the legal stuff and potential for conflict. Any advice on how to handle those diplomatically?
Contract negotiations, they can be tricky, but they don't have to be like this battle,
Right.
The key is to approach them as a collaboration. Use language that's about suggesting finding solutions that work for everybody.
Okay, so could you give me an example? Because I'm trying to picture how to make those requests without sounding, like I'm demanding things.
Sure. Let's imagine there's a clause about payment terms and you want to change it. So instead of just saying, we can't agree to these terms, you could say something like, we really appreciate the payment schedule you've proposed. Could we maybe explore a little modification, something that might work a bit better for our cash flow, but we still want to make sure that you're getting paid on time?
Okay, I see. So you're acknowledging what they've put forward,
Right.
but you're also clearly stating your needs.
Exactly. And you're opening it up for discussion.
It's a much more, friendly way to approach it.
It is, yeah. It's about finding that balance,
Yeah.
being assertive but also flexible, working together to find that best solution.
Absolutely. Now, deadlines, those are always a fun one.
Oh, yeah.
Because it can be so hard to push back on a tight timeline without seeming, uncooperative or difficult.
Mhm.
So what's the best way to handle those kinds of conversations diplomatically?
Well, that's where the art of what I call the timeline tango comes in.
Okay, timeline tango.
Yeah, it's about moving smoothly through those deadline discussions.
I like it.
First, acknowledge that ideal time frame, express any concerns you have,
Right.
and then propose a realistic alternative that considers everyone's needs. It's a dance
Yeah.
between meeting those expectations and setting healthy boundaries.
I love that analogy. It really captures that collaborative spirit.
Exactly.
It's not about digging your heels in. It's about finding a rhythm that works for everyone. So we've talked about silence. We've talked about questions. Are there other more, I guess, advanced or nuanced techniques that can really kind of take your negotiation skills to the next level?
Oh, absolutely. Think of these as like the secret sauce ingredients.
Okay, spill the secret sauce. I'm all ears.
Well, one technique that can really shift the energy in a negotiation is what I call framing with possibility. It's all about shifting the language away from like rigid demands and into a more open exploration of what could be.
So instead of saying, we need this, we should try.
Yeah, instead of saying, we need this, you could say, what if we explored this avenue? Or let's look at all the possibilities here. It opens things up. It keeps the conversation flowing in a more positive and collaborative direction.
I can see how that would make a big difference just in how the conversation feels overall.
It does, yeah.
Now, you talked about the power of silence, which is so interesting.
Yeah.
But what about when we do need to speak? Are there any kind of tactical ways to phrase things to have the most impact?
Yeah, there is one technique. It uses a little bit of psychology. I call it strategic echoing.
Ooh, psychology.
Yeah, it's about subtly mirroring the language of the person you're talking to while also gently guiding the conversation in a direction that's more productive.
Okay, I like this. Give me an example.
Sure. Let's say the other person says, "This timeline is impossible."
Right, a classic.
Instead of getting into an argument, you could say, "I understand your concerns about the timeline. Let's break down why it seems impossible and see if we can come up with some creative solutions together."
That's brilliant because you're validating their feelings, but you're also shifting it into problem-solving mode.
Exactly.
It's like verbal judo.
Exactly. And it works online, too.
Oh, right. We can't forget about the digital world. So how do we take these techniques and adapt them for things like video calls and emails? Any tips for, what do you call it, digital diplomacy?
Yes, digital diplomacy. Well, online, I recommend a technique called digital mirroring.
Yeah, okay.
It's basically strategic echoing, but tailored for the digital world. So pay attention to the language, the tone that's being used in those emails, in those chat messages, and try to reflect those elements in your responses.
Okay, so you're creating that sense of connection, even though you're not face-to-face.
Exactly. And you'd be surprised how much these small tweaks to your digital communication can really help build trust and keep those online negotiations moving forward.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
Now, I know we've talked about it a bit, but can we go back to the power of silence? Because it feels so counterintuitive, especially in the business world where everything's so fast-paced.
I know, it's true. But silence can actually be your secret weapon, especially in those high-stakes situations. Sometimes the best thing you can say is nothing at all.
It's true. Like, if you think about it, a well-timed pause, it can build anticipation.
Exactly.
Or it can give the other side a chance to rethink things.
And it prevents you from saying something you'll regret later.
It also gives you a chance to, gather your thoughts.
Yes.
Think about your next move.
Exactly.
And when it comes to online communication, mastering that silence is even more crucial, I would think.
It is, yeah. And I have a technique for that, too. I call it the digital pause and pivot. It helps you navigate those, sometimes awkward gaps in virtual meetings.
Digital pause and pivot. Writing that one down. Okay, so all of this is really starting to come together for me. It's fascinating how these subtle shifts in communication can have such a big impact.
It really is all about being intentional with your words and your silence.
Speaking of potentially uncomfortable conversations, let's talk about, the elephant in the room.
Yes.
Because discussing pricing and payment terms,
ooh, it can be so awkward.
It can be so awkward and stressful. So how do we make those conversations less painful?
It's less cringeworthy.
Yeah, and more productive.
Well, the key is to approach money talks with the same kind of finesse that we've been discussing. Instead of just throwing numbers around, which can feel very impersonal,
right? Yeah.
Transactional, use language that emphasizes value and makes those numbers more palatable, let's say.
I'm all about making those conversations less awkward. So give me some examples. Like, what are some specific things we can say?
Well, remember the value bridge technique we talked about earlier? That's really helpful here. Highlight those concrete benefits the client will get for their investment.
Right.
So instead of saying, our product costs X dollars, you could say.
Yeah.
For an investment of X dollars, you'll gain these specific advantages, and those will help you achieve Y outcome. You're moving beyond just a simple purchase.
Right.
You're talking about a partnership.
It's like you're selling them a path to success.
Exactly.
Not just a product or service.
And there are some subtle psychology tricks you can use, too. I call this price cushioning. It's about framing the numbers so they seem less intimidating.
Okay, price cushioning. I'm intrigued.
Yeah, so for example, instead of saying the price is $10,000, you could say the investment in just under $10,000.
Yeah.
Or instead of we charge a 10% fee, you try our fee is a modest 10%.
Okay. Yeah, I see how those small changes, they
Yeah.
can make a difference.
They really can. It's all about psychology, you know?
Wow.
How you present those figures can subtly influence how the other side sees the value and ultimately the deal itself.
It really is amazing how much nuance goes into these conversations. We've covered so much ground here,
Okay.
from the power of silence to these subtle psychological tactics. But before we move on, I want to talk about another big element of negotiation,
Okay.
which is time management.
Ah, yes, time, so precious in the business world.
It is. It really is.
And the way you talk about timelines, about deadlines, that can make a huge difference in how expectations are set and how much stress everyone feels.
Yeah, for sure. So how do we approach those conversations about time without creating tension or seeming inflexible?
One technique I find really useful is to focus on the difference between urgency and importance in the language you use. It's about separating those tasks that are truly time-sensitive
Oh, okay.
from those that are important, but maybe have a little more wiggle room.
So it's about being strategic
Yeah,
with how we communicate our priorities.
exactly. So instead of just putting ASAP on everything,
Right.
take a moment to think about how urgent it really is and use language that accurately reflects that.
That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah,
It helps avoid that feeling of everything being an emergency all the time.
it does, yeah. And keep in mind that on a global scale, different cultures have different ideas about time.
Right, right.
What's a reasonable deadline in one culture might be considered very rushed or disrespectful in another.
Always do your cultural homework, right?
Always, yeah. It's crucial.
So we've talked about contracts.
Mm-hmm.
We talked about time management. Let's go back to contracts for a second. Specifically, those times when you need to request changes. Because that can be a little bit of a minefield even when it's a small change.
It can be, yeah. But it doesn't have to be. Go into those conversations, ready to work together, and use language that's focused on finding solutions that are good for both sides.
So less legalese, more, I guess, plain English,
Yeah,
and a friendly tone.
exactly. So instead of saying, we need to change this clause, you could say, we'd like to talk about this particular clause and see if we can find some wording that works better for both of us.
Yeah, I like that. It's much more approachable.
It is.
It doesn't put the other side on the defensive right away.
It doesn't, no.
And then when you're talking about those specific revisions, you mentioned focusing on the positive aspects of those changes
Mm-hmm.
instead of dwelling on what you don't like.
Right.
Can you give me an example of how that would sound in a real conversation?
Sure. Let's say you need to adjust a payment term. So instead of saying, this payment schedule isn't going to work for us, you could say, we'd like to suggest a slightly adjusted payment schedule. This would really help us manage our cash flow more efficiently while still making sure you get paid on time.
Okay, so you're emphasizing the benefits for both sides.
Exactly. It makes it much more likely that they'll be open to the idea.
It's that win-win approach again.
Exactly. And that mindset of collaboration is so important, especially when things don't go according to plan, which, let's face it,
Happens all the time.
happens all the time.
Yeah.
You know, delays, disruptions, sudden changes in scope. These things happen, and they can really throw a wrench in even the most well-planned negotiations.
Oh yeah, for sure. So how do we handle those moments diplomatically?
Mm-hmm.
Keep things from going completely off the rails.
Those unexpected situations, they really test your negotiation skills.
They do.
But they're also a chance to show your problem-solving skills and actually build even stronger relationships. The key is to stay calm,
Right.
communicate openly and honestly,
Mm-hmm.
and use language that reduces tension and encourages collaboration.
So it's about staying cool under pressure
Yeah.
and using those diplomacy skills to navigate the storm.
Exactly.
Are there any specific techniques that you recommend for those emergency situations? Because I feel like I could always use more tools in my crisis management
Yeah.
toolbox.
Absolutely. One technique that's been really helpful for my clients is what I call crisis pivot language.
Crisis pivot language.
Yeah, and it involves 3 key steps. Acknowledge the problem,
Okay.
express empathy for the impact it might have, and then pivot to a solution-focused approach.
I love that. So it's so much more proactive and reassuring than just saying, "Oh no, we're in trouble."
It is, yeah.
Can you give me a real life example?
Sure. Let's say there's been a big delay in your supply chain and it's going to affect the project timeline. So instead of freaking out, you could say, we've run into an unexpected delay in our supply chain, and we understand that this might cause some inconvenience for you. We're already looking into alternative solutions to minimize the impact, and we'll keep you updated every step of the way.
That's great. You're acknowledging the issue, you're expressing empathy, and you're immediately shifting the focus to finding a solution.
Exactly. You're showing them that you're committed to transparency and that you're proactive.
Okay, so we've talked about handling these tricky situations with one other person. But what about when there are multiple stakeholders involved?
Oh, yeah.
Because when you have all these different departments, personalities, agendas,
It gets complicated.
it can get so messy. So how do we handle those multi-party negotiations without things just completely spiraling out of control?
Yeah, navigating multi-party negotiations can feel like herding cats, but there are some language techniques that can help you manage those different perspectives and guide everyone towards a successful outcome.
Okay, give me the cat herding secrets.
Well, one technique that I've seen work really well is what I call consensus building language.
Okay.
It's all about using phrases that encourage collaboration, that highlight those shared goals, and create a sense of ownership over the final decision.
So it's finding that common ground and building on it.
Exactly. Instead of getting stuck in those individual demands, you focus on solutions that work for the whole group.
Can you give me some specific examples of those consensus building phrases? Like, how do you steer the conversation in that direction?
Sure. Instead of saying, I think we should do this, try, what if we considered this approach as a team? Or let's see how this option might benefit everyone involved.
Those are much more inclusive. They make everyone feel like they're part of the decision-making process.
Exactly. It's about creating that sense of shared responsibility and making sure everyone feels heard and valued.
I like it. And that brings us to another really important part of negotiation, which is the follow-up. Because it's not over when you shake hands, right?
Absolutely not. The follow-up is so often overlooked, but it's crucial. It helps build trust, it makes sure things run smoothly, and it sets the stage for strong, long-lasting relationships.
So how do we master the art of the follow-up? How do we keep that momentum going?
One technique I suggest is the momentum maintenance method. It's all about staying connected, providing updates, reiterating those key points, but doing it in a way that keeps the energy up without being too pushy.
So it's finding that balance between staying top of mind but also respecting boundaries.
Exactly. And to avoid any confusion later on, it's really important to make sure everyone's on the same page about what was agreed upon. I call this the confirmation cascade.
Confirmation cascade. Okay, tell me more about that. Sounds like a way to avoid those, wait, what did we decide? Moments.
Yeah, it's really just about sending out clear, concise summaries after each meeting or conversation, highlighting those key decisions and action items. It removes any ambiguity, keeps everyone aligned, and it creates a written record of what you talked about.
That's such a smart idea. It's like a safety net to catch any potential misunderstanding or slip-ups.
Exactly, and it paves the way for a smooth and successful implementation of the agreement.
This is all great stuff. You know, we've covered so much today, from the power of silence to this digital mirroring, from handling those crisis situations to mastering those multi-party negotiations.
It's been a whirlwind.
It's been a whirlwind tour of diplomatic business English.
It has.
But before we wrap things up, I'd love to hear more about that action plan for success you mentioned earlier. Give us some concrete steps that our listeners can take to actually put these techniques into practice and start seeing results.
I'm happy to. It all starts with what I call the 24-hour transformation challenge.
The 24-hour challenge. I like that. Feels doable. Yeah. And a good way to start putting these ideas into action. So what does it involve?
It's actually pretty straightforward. Just pick one technique we talked about today. The one that really resonated with you. Could be the pause and probe, the value bridge, whatever grabbed your attention. And commit to using it in your very next business interaction. Doesn't matter if it's an email, a phone call, a face-to-face meeting.
I like it. It's low pressure. A way to test drive these techniques in the real world.
Exactly.
See how they feel, like a little experiment.
Yeah, like a little experiment.
A real-time feedback.
And as you start trying it out, really pay attention to how people respond. What works, what maybe needs some tweaking. The more you practice, the more natural these diplomatic language patterns will become, part of your everyday communication.
It's like anything else. The more you do it, the more comfortable you get. But realistically, not every conversation is a formal negotiation.
Yeah.
So how can we use these techniques in those everyday interactions?
Every interaction is a chance to sharpen your skills.
Okay.
Even those routine emails, the quick meetings, don't think of them as just tasks to get through. Think of them as little practice sessions.
Okay.
Work on your phrasing, your tone, how you build rapport. Like next time you need a favor from a colleague, try framing with possibility. Instead of saying, I need you to do this, try, what if we explored this together?
I see, yeah. It's subtle, but it changes the dynamic.
It does. And as you weave these techniques into your daily communication, you'll start to notice they become second nature. You'll see a difference in how people react to you. You'll feel more confident, more in control.
It's amazing, really, how much power these seemingly small shifts in language can have. I'm already thinking about my own communication patterns and how I can be more intentional.
It's been great sharing these insights with you. And remember, diplomatic language is a powerful tool, and like any tool, it gets more effective with practice. So keep experimenting, keep refining your approach, and I have no doubt you'll see great results.
So there you have it, everyone. Our deep dive into diplomatic business English, packed with strategies you can actually use, whether you're in a boardroom or a virtual meeting. We talked about why those words matter so much, how to navigate those cultural differences, and we gave you a whole toolkit of techniques to level up your negotiation game.
We did.
Most importantly, we've given you a plan to actually put these ideas into practice so you can turn every conversation into a chance to improve your communication skills.
For those of you who are ready to take it even further, our next deep dive will be all about how to create presentations that really connect with international audiences. We'll get into those subtle dynamics of cross-cultural communication when you're speaking publicly and uncover those secrets to capturing the attention of diverse business audiences all over the world.
Sounds fascinating. Looking forward to that one. Until then, happy negotiating, everyone.